Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. I imagine we'll finish that wisdom candle today with God's help. Who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehuda in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri, who's going to be catching the replay because he's going to a council meeting. Wonderful world of budget motions. There is no greater service for your congregation. Shandora in the Bronx, Bell in Texas, Leona Sue in Southern Illinois. Elle is in the house, and Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by my good friend Naftali Dembitzer in honor of Yoni and Chaya Loffman and the family. May they all be showered in blessings. All members of your family, Naftali, be showered in blessings, even more than your ample imagination could conceive. And we say Amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Today is 5/21. Okay. Our daf is page 82 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We are continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 6. And with God's help, today we'll also open and complete Mishna number. We continue our discussion of Mishna number 5, and today, God willing, we'll complete our discussion of Mishnah number 6, and with it, chapter 6. Okay, we picked this up a few lines from the top on page 82a, and we've been discussing that a lender who holds collateral that belongs to the borrower, he's holding some kind of property, some kind of item, as collateral for the loan that he has extended to the borrower. And so this collateral that he's holding, what is the lender's liability with respect to taking care of the collateral? And our choices are, is he a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee? And you could see that he's a paid bailee because he's getting benefit from having that collateral there. Namely, he's got security that if the loan is not paid back, he can keep that collateral. So he's definitely getting a benefit from that. But we've seen there's a distinction depending on what was loaned. That if he lends money, then, at least according to one opinion, he's considered an unpaid bailee for the collateral. Whereas if what he lends is produce, then he's considered a paid bailee. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. I'm not sure exactly why that is, except that perhaps when you're lending produce, we've got a little bit of that sense of the mutual obligations, right? That somebody who borrowed your stuff, he's certainly responsible for your stuff. And as a security, you've got his stuff, and there is some kind of mutual obligations in that. Whereas when you lend money, I don't know why you would have a less of a obligation. But at any rate, this is the conversation that we're in. I can't quite justify it. Okay, so the Gemara suggests, let us say that the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, and what was it, right? most of the sages of the Mishnah were students of Rabbi Akiva, and the anonymous Mishnayos are generally presumed to follow the rulings of Rabbi Akiva. So it would be problematic to think that Mishnahs don't follow the rulings of Rabbi Akiva. It can happen, but it's not our default position. Okay, so let us say that the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer applies only in a case where the collateral is not equal to the monetary value of the loan, and what they disagree about is the statement of Shmuel. As Shmuel says, with regard to one who lends 1,000 dinars, large amount of money, to another, and the borrower puts before the lender as collateral for the loan the handle of a sickle, which is worth much, much less, a tiny fraction of that 1,000 dinars. Nevertheless, says Shmuel, if the collateral is lost, the loan is lost, even if the collateral is worth a tiny fraction of what the loan is worth, right? So this would seem to indicate that the obligations of a lender who's holding collateral in terms of his obligation to safeguard that collateral is very high. And if you're going to say that if this thing gets lost or damaged due to his negligence, or even just lost, right? If he has the liability of a paid bailee with regard to it, I mean, it's an extraordinary ruling to say that first of all, he was very generous that he accepted as collateral for 1,000 dinars, an item that is worth, let's say 1 dinar. But that if he then loses that 1 dinar sickle, the loan is considered lost. Now, if the collateral and the loan were equal in value, then you could understand that if the lender, through his malfeasance of whatever kind, the collateral is gone, either ruined or stolen or lost or something, okay, so he loses the loan. He's not going to get paid back for his loan because he wasn't able to take care of the collateral, which had the same value as the loan. But when you're talking about a collateral that's worth so much less than the loan, really? If that collateral is lost, then the loan is lost too? That's what Shmuel rules, and the sages generally do not agree with Shmuel in this matter. Shmuel, we agree with him on almost everything, but not this. So the Gemara rejects this suggestion. And so with regard to that ruling of Shmuel, the Gemara is suggesting that Rabbi Akiva would agree with this ruling, whereas Rabbi Eliezer would disagree with it. But the Gemara rejects this suggestion. If the case is one where the collateral is not equal to the amount of money constituting the loan, everyone holds that the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. But here the dispute is referring to a situation where the collateral does equal the amount. The value of the collateral equals the amount of money constituting the loan. And still they disagree with regard to a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. Right, so it's not Shmuel who says that no matter what, if the collateral is lost, the loan is lost. That's not what Akiva and Eliezer are disagreeing about. Rather, they're disagreeing about a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. So, what does Rabbi Yitzchak say? From where is it derived, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, from where is it derived that a creditor acquires collateral given to him and is considered its owner as long as the item is in his possession? Interesting ruling, right? So I lend money to my neighbor. I lend him $100. He puts up a security to make me comfortable that I'm going to get my $100 back. He puts up a baseball glove, his favorite baseball glove. So I'm holding the baseball glove. He's got the $100 that I loaned to him. Now, while this baseball glove is in my possession, what is my relationship to that baseball glove? Now, we've been talking about it in terms of being a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee, right? An unpaid bailee, if that's it, I'm not getting paid to safeguard it. So then I'm only going to be liable for, losing it if I am negligent, if I am actually negligent. If I'm a paid bailee, then if there's loss or theft, whether I'm negligent or not, I'm going to be liable for it. Because that's the responsibilities of a paid bailee. A borrower, but I wouldn't be liable in circumstances beyond my control. If I was a borrower, then I would be liable, even if for circumstances beyond my control, because the borrower is always liable. Now, what if, but now what is Rabbi Yitzchak saying? He's saying, I'm not. Actually, if this is collateral that I'm holding for the return of that $100, no, I'm not a bailee at all. I'm the owner of that collateral. As long as that collateral is with me, I'm considered the owner of the collateral. I'll have to give it back if the loan is paid off, but while it's with me, I'm actually considered to be the owner of that collateral. Why? Says Rabbi Yitzchak, this is derived from a verse, as it is stated in the Torah, Exodus 24:13. You shall return the pledge to him when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his garment and bless you, and it shall be a righteousness for you before the Lord your God. Right? So in the case where I'm taking as a pledge, not somebody's baseball glove that presumably they could do without for a few days, I mean, unless it's a professional baseball player, in which case he shouldn't have put that up as collateral. But if it's a very poor person who really has a tough time getting a loan and he puts up the cloak on his back, right? Let's say the heavy coat. He's dressed. He's not walking around naked. But at night, he needs that to keep warm. So says the Torah, you shall return that pledge to him when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his garment and bless you. And it shall be a righteousness for you. It's considered a righteousness for you that you return the pledge to him. So Rabbi Yitzchak infers, if the creditor, right, the lender, does not acquire the collateral as his own possession, then from where is the righteousness involved in returning it? Right? If you're giving it over, it must be that it's yours to give. Otherwise, it wouldn't be considered righteousness. So in this case, the creditor would not be giving up anything of his own if it's not his possession. And from here it is derived that a creditor, legally speaking, acquires the collateral as his own. There's a time component to it, right? When the loan comes back, he has to give it back. When the loan is paid off, he has to give it back. But while it's his, he has acquired it. And that is also because if the loan doesn't get paid back, he acquired it, and we consider that he acquired it from the time that it came into his possession. However, the Gemara rejects this suggestion as an explanation for what it is that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer are disagreeing about. Can you understand it that way? You could say that Rabbi Yitzchak stated this halacha in a case where he took his collateral not at the time of his loan, but at a later stage in order to collect his debt. But did Rabbi Yitzchak say this ruling in a situation where he took his collateral at the time of his loan? Now, the timing of taking the collateral matters, as we saw yesterday, because if it's taken later, right, like the loan was extended, the money's not coming in, and so now the lender goes and says, listen, I'm going to take your cloak. You got to pay me back. I'm taking your cloak until you pay me back. So that is a case where he's clearly taking the collateral for the purpose of getting his loan paid back. And as we saw yesterday, if the collateral changes hands at the time that the loan is extended, there's an argument that could be made that it isn't really acting as security for the loan, but rather as evidence of the loan. He doesn't have a right to keep it in case the loan doesn't get paid off. He's just holding it as evidence that a loan was extended in case he has to take the guy to court. And that would change the relationship of whether he's considered a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee. So here, Rabbi Yitzchak might be talking about somebody who sees that cloak later because he wasn't getting paid, where for sure it's a security interest and not just an evidentiary interest. Now, rather, if he took his collateral not at the time of his loan, everyone holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak. And here it is discussing a case where he took his collateral at the time of his loan. And Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva disagree with regard to the case of a bailee of a lost item. Why are we talking about lost items? Because if you find a lost item, you have a Torah obligation to try to return it to its owner, right? So you're going to proclaim you found a lost item. somebody who knows what it is and can identify it should step forward and claim it. And while you're holding it until the owner will come forward and claim it, you are a custodian of that lost object. And what are your obligations? Are you a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee? Sounds like you'd be an unpaid bailee. I mean, you're going out of your way to help return this thing. Why would you have a higher level of liability than an unpaid bailee? So what do we learn? And what Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva disagree with regard to the case of a bailee of a lost item. As it was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed concerning the responsibility of the bailee for a lost item. If someone found a lost item and it is subsequently lost or stolen from him, what responsibility does he bear toward the owner? Rabbah said this individual is considered like an unpaid bailee. Rav Yosef said he is considered like a paid bailee. And the Gemara suggests, let us say, that the opinion of Rav Yosef is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna. There is no question that Rabbah's opinion is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim, as Rabbi Akiva's opinion cannot be reconciled with his ruling. If one takes collateral for his loan, he is considered if one who takes collateral for his loan is considered a paid bailee, well, then the same certainly applies to one who goes out of his way to safeguard a lost item. And the Gemara is asking whether there is any way to explain Rav Yosef's ruling in accordance with the opinions of both Tanaim, as if, or if he must accept that Rabbi Eliezer disputes his opinion. And the Gemara responds, no, it is possible with regard to a bailee for a lost item that everyone holds in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef, even Rabbi Eliezer, right? That he is considered a paid bailee, presumably because he's getting the benefit of fulfilling a mitzvah, fulfilling the mitzvah of returning a lost item. You're getting benefit from that. And so your obligation toward that object on behalf of the owner is higher, that of a paid bailee rather than an unpaid bailee. So here in the Baraisa, they disagree with regard to a lender who needs the collateral, i.e. the lender wants to use the collateral and deduct the value of its use from the amount of the loan. He's going to start paying, making sure the loan gets paid off by renting out the collateral or some other way deriving benefit from it with a monetary value, which will reduce the amount of the outstanding loan. So one sage that Rabbi Akiva holds that he is performing a mitzvah doing that, in that he lent to him, and therefore he is considered a paid bailee. And the other sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that he is not performing a mitzvah, as his intention is to lend for his own benefit. And consequently, he is considered an unpaid bailee for the collateral. And the Mishnah teaches that Abba Shaul says it is permitted for a person to rent out a poor person's collateral that was given to him for a loan, so that he shall set a rental price for it and thereby progressively reduce the debt. Because this is considered like returning a lost item. You're helping the poor person pay off his loan by renting out the collateral that he deposited with you, and you're sort of finding lost money for the poor person by reducing his debt to you by renting out his collateral. And this is the opinion of Abba Shaul. But even Abba Shaul said his ruling only with regard to a hoe, a chisel, and an axe, since the remuneration from these utensils is great and their depreciation is small. But if the collateral is going to be depleted in a significant way by renting it out, then the lender who's holding the collateral cannot do that. So, and that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. So where the law came out about this, just to state it succinctly, is like this. One who lends based on collateral is considered a paid bailee for that collateral, right? So if he's negligent and it's damaged or lost, he is liable. And if it's lost not through his negligence, or if it's stolen, but it's in his care, he's liable. The only time he's not going to be liable if it's some kind of circumstances beyond his control, like a tornado strikes his warehouse while he's holding that collateral. that he's not going to be liable for. But anything in the normal course of events, he will be, right? So a lender holding collateral has the obligations of a paid bailee. And this is the case whether the loan is for money or for produce, in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And this is the case whether the collateral was given at the time of the loan or later. So they discussed all these different possibilities, but a lender who lends something and receives collateral in return, his obligation is that of a paid bailee. Furthermore, it makes no difference whether or not it was explicitly stipulated that the lender is taking the collateral for its specific value. Therefore, if the collateral is lost or stolen, the lender is liable. If the lost or stolen collateral was equal in value to the amount of the loan, neither party has further claim against the other. If the collateral was of greater value than the loan, the lender pays the borrower the difference. If the loan was worth more, the borrower pays the lender the difference. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Mishnah 6, the final Mishnah here in chapter 6. And we are on page 82b. With regard to one who is transporting a barrel from one place to another, and he broke it, so whether he was an unpaid bailee or a paid bailee, if he takes an oath that he was not negligent, he is exempt from payment. Now, we can understand if he's an unpaid bailee, and he takes an oath that he was not negligent, so then he's exempt. But if he's a paid bailee, well, that's not dependent on negligence, right? So if it broke while it's in his care, that's loss, and he's a paid bailee, and so he should be liable. But now we're learning in this Mishnah that if he takes an oath that he wasn't negligent, then he's not liable. That's a surprising ruling. Must be that the sages issued a particular decree for people in the transportation business, and we shall see why. Rabbi Eliezer says, both this one, an unpaid bailee, and that one, a paid bailee, must take an oath in order to exempt themselves from payment. But I wonder whether both this one and that one can take an oath. In other words, this is the law that I heard from my teachers, but I do not understand their ruling, says Rabbi Eliezer. That's Mishnah 6. Now the Gemara. The sages taught, with regard to one who is transporting a barrel for another person from one place to another, and he broke it, whether he was an unpaid bailee or a paid bailee, if he takes an oath that he was not negligent, he is exempt from payment. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Right? Rabbi Meir was not named in the Mishnah, but most anonymous or unattributed Mishnahs can be attributed to Rabbi Meir, and this one for sure, since the Gemara says so. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, meaning he's going to disagree with Rabbi Meir and with the accepted unattributed Mishnah, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is going to be the dissenting minority view. Rabbi Yehuda says an unpaid bailee takes an oath and he does not pay. Makes sense. But a paid bailee does pay. Rabbi Eliezer says, and this is a mistake. We have a note here that this is not, the Gemara is misprint. It should say Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, it's written Rabbi Eliezer, but it should say Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar says, this one and that one take an oath. And I wonder whether both this one and that one can take an oath. Now the Gemara analyzes these opinions. Is that to say that Rabbi Meir holds that one who stumbles is not considered negligent, but the victim of an accident? Okay, so now we're even saying, wait a minute. If you're saying that somebody who's transporting a barrel breaks it, and he breaks it by tripping and falling, that's actually not an accident. That is negligence, right? Somebody who's in the transportation business has to not trip and fall when they're entrusted to carry a barrel. And if he does, then he was negligent. Right? Isn't it taught, but the victim of an accident? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? If somebody's pitcher broke in a public place and he did not remove it from there, or if his camel fell and he did not stand it up, Rabbi Meir renders him liable for the damage that they caused. And the rabbis say that he is exempt according to human laws, but he is liable according to the laws of heaven. although the court cannot impose liability, nevertheless he is morally culpable. And we maintain that what they're disagreeing about is with regard to the question of whether one who stumbles is negligent. And this indicates that Rabbi Meir holds that one who stumbles is considered negligent. And you're like, I stumble all the time. It happens. I stumble. Did I stumble because I was being negligent? I mean, I was just walking. I was walking like I normally do. Do I really have to be so careful that if I trip, it's because I was negligent? Now, here's a note. One who stumbles. The case of one who stumbles is the subject of a dispute between the Tanaim and lengthy discussions in the commentaries. A Mishna in Bava 26a teaches that people are always liable for damage inflicted by their body. So some commentaries maintain that one who inflicts damage through stumbling is an example of one causing injury through his body. And since Talmudic disagreement persists with regard to stumbling, as in the Gemara here, Tosafos distinguish between normal kinds of accidents, for which one is always liable, and unusual accidents caused by unforeseeable circumstances or otherwise out of an individual's control, for which one who stumbles is not liable. Others reject this distinction, as the sages cite several examples of relatively unusual accidents caused by one's body, for which one is nevertheless liable. Therefore, Ramban maintains that the dispute over one who stumbles indicates that this is not considered a case of injury caused by one's body, but an injury caused by one's property, concerning which there is basis for a distinction between standard and unavoidable accidents. Okay, so that's a little bit of background. Now, Rabbi Elazar said, break the Mishnah, as he who taught this did not teach that, i.e., there are two traditions with regard to Rabbi Meir's opinion. And Rabbi Yehuda came to say a different ruling. An unpaid bailee takes an oath and does not pay, while a paid bailee does pay. This one in accordance with his law and that one in accordance with his law. As an unpaid bailee is exempt from liability for theft and loss, while a paid bailee is liable in those cases and exempt only in cases of circumstances beyond his control. And Rabbi Eliezer came to say, yes, there is a tradition that is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as I learned from my teachers, but I wonder whether both this one and that one can take an oath. And that's why this Rabbi Eliezer mentioned here can't be the normal Rabbi Eliezer without further modification, because he came before Rabbi Meir. So that's why the note explains this is a different rabbi. At any rate, this Rabbi Elazar says, yes, there is a tradition that is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as I learned from my teachers, but I wonder whether both this one and that one can take an oath. And the Gemara asks, granted, an unpaid bailee, so it's confusing, but it'll become clearer. An unpaid bailee takes an oath that he was not negligent with regard to the barrel, as required by Torah law. Right? An unpaid bailee is only liable if he's negligent. So if there were no witnesses, and he says, look, this happened, it wasn't my fault, I was not negligent, he takes an oath to that effect, and he doesn't have to pay. Okay, that makes sense. But why would a paid bailee ever take an oath for a broken barrel? Even if he was not negligent, he is still required to pay, as he is obligated to pay for theft and loss. And even with regard to an unpaid bailee, this works out well if the barrel broke on an inclined plane, as the accident occurred due to the difficulty of transporting it on this hill. But if it broke not on an inclined plane, but under different circumstances, well, then how can he take an oath that he was not negligent with it? Evidently, it was his negligence that caused the accident. If it broke, it was in his care, and it wasn't some kind of unavoidable, circumstances beyond his control. If it wasn't his control, then it must be that he was negligent. So how can he take an oath that he was not negligent? Now we're on page 83a. I'm getting a little bit of a head start on tomorrow's page. And even on an inclined plane, this works out well where there is no evidence, i.e. in a case without witnesses. But where there is evidence, then let him bring evidence and be exempt. If he doesn't have to take an oath, if he can bring witnesses that will testify that what happened was not his fault. He wasn't negligent. So then he doesn't need an oath. He brings evidence. So why then is he forced to take an oath, right? It seems like Rabbi Eliezer said he must take an oath. Why then is he forced to take an oath? As it is taught in a Baraisa, Isi ben Yehuda says, with regard to the verse, and it died or was hurt or driven away without an eyewitness, an oath of the Lord shall be between them. Exodus 22, 9 and 10. And from that, one can infer that if there is an eyewitness, so he brings his eyewitness and he'll be exempt from payment. He doesn't have to take an oath unless there's no evidence, no witnesses. So the Gemara previously cited Rabbi Elazar's answer to the apparent contradiction between the statements of Rabbi Meir, which was followed by an analysis of the various opinions of the Tanaim. Now the Gemara presents a different interpretation. And Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says there is no difficulty with the oath proposed by Rabbi Meir, as this oath is a decree of the sages for the betterment of the world. And the reason for this oath that the sages imposed is that if you do not say so, that an unpaid bailee who broke the barrel in transport can exempt himself by means of an oath, you will have no person who will be willing to transport a barrel from another, before another person from one place to another, due to the fear that it might break and he will have to pay. Right? So whatever the fee is for transporting the barrel, it's much less than the value of the barrel, right? And as long as the guy can say, look, I handle myself in the normal way of people transporting barrels, every now and then a barrel breaks, okay? But I was not negligent, and so I don't have to pay. And if you're not going to accept that from people in this transportation business, there's going to be no transportation business, right? And so that's why the sages issued this decree. It is not consistent with the normal law of paid and unpaid bailees, but it was necessary so that there could be a thriving transportation business, and everybody needs a transportation business so they can ship their barrels from one place to another. Now the Gemara asks, how exactly does he take an oath? Rava said that the phrasing is, I take an oath that I broke it unintentionally. And Rabbi Yehuda came to say, an unpaid bailee takes an oath, while a paid bailee just pays. This one in accordance with his law, and that one in accordance with his law, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, well, paid bailees are not going to qualify for this oath. A paid bailee is a paid bailee, and unless it was some kind of circumstances beyond his control, he's going to have to pay. He is liable. Presumably, he's getting paid more because he's undertaking that responsibility. And Rabbi Elazar came to say, yes, there is a tradition in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but I wonder whether both this one and that one can take an oath. Meaning, is he saying that neither one of them is even possible for them to take an oath? Or is he saying... Is he saying, can both of them take an oath, right? Is he saying none of them can take an oath? Or is he saying, well, I understand that the unpaid bailee can take an oath, but I don't understand how the paid bailee could take an oath. It's a little unclear. Now, granted, an unpaid bailee takes an oath that he was not negligent with regard to the barrel. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar understands that. But with regard to a paid bailee, why does he take an oath? Even if he was not negligent, he is still required to pay. And even with regard to an unpaid bailee, this works out well if the barrel was on an inclined plane, which is a higher level of difficulty. But if it broke not on an inclined plane, but under different circumstances, how can he take an oath that he was not negligent with it? He must have been negligent. That's why it broke. And even on an inclined plane, this works out well where there is no evidence. But where there is evidence, let him bring evidence and be exempt. Why take an oath if there's evidence? So why would you say he's forced to take an oath? As it is taught in Baraisa, Isi ben Yehuda says with regard to the verse, and it died or was hurt or driven away without an eyewitness, an oath of the Lord shall be between them, that one can infer from here that if there is an eyewitness, let him bring evidence and be exempt from taking an oath and from paying. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man who transported a barrel of wine in the market of Mechoza, and he broke it on one of the protrusions of a wall in Mechoza, right? So the guy is carrying this heavy barrel. There was a protrusion from the wall. He didn't see it. He bumped into it. The barrel broke. All the wine spilled out. Now, was he negligent? I mean, you can feel sorry for the guy, sure. But if his job is to transport barrels, and it's known that there's protrusions sticking out of walls, so, it's not imposing so much to say, yeah, don't bump into neither walls nor protrusions from walls. You could argue it was a new protrusion. It wasn't there the day before yesterday. This guy's used to transporting barrels there all the time. He knows where the protrusions are in the walls, and it was a new protrusion. Now, yeah, it's not so clear, right? Is he negligent? Is he not negligent? It's hard to say. But this was the incident. So he broke it by bumping into one of the protrusions from a wall. The case came before Rava, who said to him, with regard to the market of Mechoza, people are generally found there. Go bring evidence that you were not negligent and you will be exempt. So Rav Yosef, who was Rava's son, said to him, in accordance with whose opinion did you issue this ruling? In accordance with the opinion of Issi ben Yehuda? And Rava said to his son, yes, I ruled in accordance with the ruling of Issi. And we hold in accordance with his opinion, that if you can bring evidence, you don't have to take an oath and you won't have to pay. And that's what he did. So the Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain man who said to another, go and buy for me 400 pitchers of wine. The second man went and bought them for him. Ultimately, he came before the first man and said to him, I bought the 400 pitchers of wine for you, but they fermented, right? They spoiled. The case came before Rava, who said to the second man, if 400 pitchers of wine fermented, this matter would generate publicity, i.e. people would have heard of this occurrence. So go and bring proof that initially when you purchased the pitchers, the wine was good, and you will be exempt. You weren't negligent that you bought wine that was already bad. If you can bring somebody who's a witness that when you bought the wine, it was good, and then it fermented because there was something wrong with the wine, but you couldn't know that, then you were not negligent and you will be exempt. And you don't have to take an oath because there's a witness. Rav Yosef, Rava's son, said to his father, in accordance with whose opinion did you issue this ruling? Was it in accordance with that of Issi ben Yehuda? And Rava said to his son, yes, I ruled in accordance with the ruling of Issi. We hold in accordance with his opinion. And the Gemara relates that Rav Chiya bar Yosef issued a decree in the city of Sikra, where he was the presiding sage. And with regard to those who carry loads on a pole, and the item breaks, they must pay half. What is the reason? Such a pole is used to carry loads that are too much for one individual to carry and too little for two. Consequently, this breakage is close to an accident and equally close to negligence. And therefore, they compromise with a payment of half liability. Right? He was carrying something pretty heavy. He needed the money. He was willing to, sort of strain and labor and take this heavy load. It's just a little too heavy for one person, but it's not enough for two people. So we say, okay, it's this marginal area. Might be negligent, might not. You really carried something heavier than you should have, but not a lot heavier than you should have. So if it breaks, you're liable for half of its value. That was the decree. But if he carried this item with a digla, this is a wooden tool designed for double loads, right? This is a wooden tool that's designed for something that's so heavy that two people carry it hanging from a pole that is suspended on the shoulders of two people. So if one guy was carrying a load that was obviously meant to be carried by two people, and then it breaks, okay, he's negligent because he's taking something that's definitely too heavy for one person. And so if it breaks, he pays in full. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara relates an incident involving Rabba bar Chanan. Certain porters broke his barrel of wine. The sage's barrel of wine. Rabba bar Chanan's barrel of wine. So he hired some porters and they broke it after he hired them to transport it. So he took the cloaks of the porters as payment for the lost wine. He just seized their cloaks and says, well, okay, this will cover the cost of the wine. Maybe it won't even cover the cost of the wine, but at least I'm going to get something by having these cloaks. The porters came and told Rav. Rav said to Rabba bar bar Chanan, give them back their cloaks. Rabba bar bar Chanan said to him, is this the law? And Rav said to Rabba bar bar Chanan, yes, as it is written, that you may walk in the way of good people. Proverbs 2:20. So Rabba bar bar Chanan gave them their cloaks. And the porters said to Rav, we are poor people, and we worked all day, and we are hungry, and we have nothing. Rav said to Rabba bar bar Chanan, go and give them their wages. Now he's giving them their wages for transporting these barrels of wine that they broke, presumably with some negligence on their part, right? So not only does he have to give them their cloaks back that he seized as payment, he's now going to have to also pay them their wages, which they should not be entitled to because they did not fulfill this job. And Rabba bar bar Chanan said to him, is this the law? And Rav said to him, yes, as it is written, and keep the paths of the righteous. Proverbs 2:20. Now, what is the law on this? If barrels broke while workers were transporting them from place to place, by Torah law, the workers must pay the owner for the lost property. The sages were concerned that this ruling would make it difficult to find people willing to serve as porters. Therefore, they decreed that the workers do not have to pay if they take an oath that they were not negligent. Some commentaries following the straightforward meaning of the incident involving Rabba bar bar Chanan hold that not only are the workers exempt from paying for the damage, but they even receive their wages. Others maintain that the workers do lose their wages, but if they are in need of a livelihood, it is an act of piety to pay them. So it's definitely not a stretch to say that Rav made Rabba bar bar Chanan pay them, not because he was obligated in the normal course of business that a business owner would hire porters and they, broke his merchandise, but because Rabba bar bar Chanan was also a sage, and Rav is holding him to a higher standard, and it should not be said that the sages are hard-hearted and are less than, the most pious people. So he held him to a higher standard than he would have held a normal business owner. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 6, and we conclude chapter 6. So with God's help, tomorrow, at our regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, on Wednesday, we should be opening chapter 7. Okay, a few questions. Tom, regarding someone who holds collateral, does he have to make an active acquisition? Great question, Tom. You really understand the material. So Tom is asking, well, according to the view of Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that one who holds collateral for someone else actually acquires it, because we learn in the Torah that if you're holding the cloak of a poor person as collateral, you have to give it back to him at night, meaning you're lending it to him at night, as an act of righteousness. Therefore, we understand that the lender who's holding collateral has acquired that collateral as a possession of his. So Tom is asking, well, if he has to acquire it as a possession for this law to work properly, well, then it must be that he has to perform a kinyan, an act of formal acquisition, right? So if it's, for example, an item that can be lifted, he has to lift it. If it's an animal, he has to lead it, a few paces. I'm not sure, but it sounds definitely like you're right. I believe you're right, but I'm not sure if everyone holds like Rabbi Yitzchak in the sense that legally speaking, you have acquired the collateral as a possession, and therefore you would need to have a kinyan on it. But I think you probably have to have the kinyan anyway, because even if we're going to say that he's functioning as a paid bailee rather than as an owner, which seems to be where the law came out, I think we've read elsewhere that, well, when does a paid bailee become a paid bailee? When it enters his possession. So there has to be some kind of a formal act of acquisition so that the liability transfers from the owner to the paid bailee. And I do believe you need the kinyan for that. Joseph asked regarding yesterday's class, I didn't get to finish last night's class. Who again was the one who merits protection? I don't remember. It was yesterday's class. Who merits protection? It was toward the end, right? It was toward the end of the daf yesterday. It was a sage who basically made a mistaken ruling that ended up being a correct ruling. So in other words, based on the information that he had, he just intuitively knew that the ruling would be different than what you would normally rule given those facts. And then it turned out that he was right because the facts weren't as they had been presented to the sage. And so this sage, serving the community and acquiring so much merit for so long as such a serious and pious Torah scholar, it was that merit that protected him when he issued a ruling that might have been a mistaken ruling, but turned out to be right in the end, because it's almost as if he intuited what the correct facts were, which were different facts than what was presented to him. Tom says, did they have insurance back then? I don't know. I'm guessing they probably did, but I bet it wasn't like the insurance that we have today, right? But it's a great question, right? I feel like we haven't encountered it in this journey through the daf. Maybe we will soon. If we're going to encounter concepts of insurance, then they will surely come up either here in Bava Metzia or in our next tractate, Bava Basra. So let's find out. Joseph says, when I was in cybersecurity, the tricky part, as we know, is always security versus functionality. Like the barrel business. Very good. And Sharon says it is important to note that a cloak served as more than a garment. It was a blanket, sometimes the bed itself, right? Very consistent with the idea that you have to give it back to a poor person if that's what he's got. By the way, I'll just mention, Nina and I have been, we made a thriller. It's coming out soon. You may have heard. And we also watch a lot of thrillers as research, as filmmakers. And we've also seen lately a lot of Korean thrillers. And one thing you notice right away when you're just kind of looking into the daily lives of Koreans is that they spend a lot more time on the floor, right? So that's why it's unthinkable to walk around their apartment with your shoes on because they sit on the floor, they eat on the floor. And many will also sleep on the floor. I don't know. I'm no kind of expert on Korean culture. I'm just reporting something I've seen in a few Korean movies. But we just saw a movie recently, where people were basically sleeping on the floor. I mean, they had a blanket and a pillow, but they were doing it on the floor. And it seems like, wow, maybe we in the West are just a little too soft, right? Like, this seems very difficult for us to imagine, sitting and eating our meals on the floor and sleeping on the floor. Like, our bodies are not used to that. But there's plenty of people in the world who their bodies are used to that. It probably makes them tougher and longer lived. I wouldn't be surprised. And certainly, this is how our ancestors function. I mean, we have certainly learned that there are beds, but we've also seen that while, there are people who had chairs, very nice, tables and chairs, there were also people that for whom a table was actually just like a cowhide, where they would put the food on top of that, but they were seated on the floor to eat their meals. So it's something it's good to remember when we're sort of reading these domestic type of situations where in our minds we might imagine table, chair, bed, and that might not be right at all. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific, to open chapter 7 here in Tractate